Exactly. Hey, it's what it is. Welcome everybody to another episode of Sales Chatter. Today we're going to talk vertical farming. What does that really mean for produce carriers? What does it mean for the reefer industry in general?
Yeah.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
Good morning, Lisa. Okay,
Good morning,
so
Lisa.
Hey, Lisa.
I'm gonna have to. My voice is getting better as you see, but I still have to conserve it. So I'm gonna try and talk less. I know that's a feat that a lot of y'all don't think I can do.
I don't know exactly.
That's funny. That's funny.
How come all of you are laughing at that? That's crazy.
It's impossible. That's why.
I was just gonna say we wouldn't have a show if you talked less. Like what would we do? Just
I appreciate that, brother. I appreciate that. But I like that all you guys just started laughing at me. That's funny. So I know it's been a little bit of a rocky road for the show lately with people's schedules and stuff. So just to let everybody know, we brought Ryan in to assist Jeff. So Ryan and Jeff are going to be pretty much running the show. I'm going to be coming in when I can in order to kind of step in. DJ's schedule is all messed up right now and everything. So we're going to bring you the format of the show like we originally promised. But there's going to be a few things over the next probably 3-4 weeks. Well, as you can see, for all of you watching, this is all radiation. And it sometimes impacts my energy, sometimes impacts my voice, depending on the day, believe it or not. So because of that, we wanted to make sure that we had a steady schedule, because I know some of you were sending me texts last week. Is the show on? When's the show? How come it's not on? What's going on? And so we want to avoid that. So Ryan and Jeff are going to pretty much be running the show from this point forward for probably the next 4 or 5 weeks. We're going to be jumping in when we can, but we're going to bring you the same format. Dean's still going to be here every Wednesday, and we're going to hammer it out for you as best possible. It's not fair to you, our listeners, the most important people here, to not have consistency in your morning. So that's why we're going to make the switch, and it's going to be for the better, and it is going to rock from this point forward. You have my word on that. So with that being said, Dean, vertical farming and the impacts on produce. Talk to us, my man. Talk to us. What do you see?
It's a fascinating story, because the news of all of the droughts or the drought in particular in the southwest and the west has captured a lot of attention, I think, this year for lots of good reasons. Obviously, we've got to do a lot better job at conserving water, but just the lack of water that we've seen in California is just incredibly difficult for farmers in particular. One of the things that's come out of this, and humans are just incredibly creative when it comes to adversity and finding different ways to do things. And one of those, and this is not a new concept, right? So vertical farming is one of the technologies they're looking at, which is literally, growing produce, certain types of produce vertically, as opposed to, on one dimension across the ground. This sort of farming dates back 2,500 years ago to the Babylonian era. I mean, they used hydroponics and all sorts of creative things thousands of years ago. So it's not new. And one of the companies that made news recently was a company that's been at this since probably about, I think it's about 9 years ago they started this. They're just starting to get to the point where it's starting to gain some traction. And why I think it's important, we're already seeing that there'll be less volume for truckload carriers coming out of California because of the lack of water and just the devastation of the drought in terms of the number of acres being planted, the yields from crops. Some of the very water-intensive crops have had to change their practices. So lots going on there. That's going to affect produce volumes. We talked about it on our show recently. Volumes were down substantially. But what's interesting with this technology, and it's not going to affect our market today, but just like the drought in California is going to affect produce season next year potentially for truckload carriers looking for healthy volumes out of the west coast back towards the east, where the majority of the population is. This company called Living Greens has acquired a 200,000 square foot warehouse in Muncie, Illinois. It's the footprint. So visualize this: the footprint's about 3.5 football fields, and they've spent a lot of money on R&D. they've got a farm going. This new site, so 3.5 football fields, they say is about 4.6 acres, but the amount of produce they'll grow there by going vertical will be as much as 200 acres on the ground. So obviously, much more efficient in terms of the use of land, but they're also much more efficient in terms of the use of water, which is a pretty big deal, but it doesn't work for all crops. So this is the important point. It's best suited for salad ingredients like leafy greens, iceberg, romaine, leaf lettuces, cabbage, spinach, bok choy, kale, those sorts of leafy greens. And of course, the big market where they come from is Salinas, just south of San Francisco. So there's a lot of reefer carriers that run out of Salinas into New York City, for example. So over time, you could see vertical farming changing the origin destination pairing of particular commodities like this. The thing that's really got my attention, though, with this, the article that was, because most of the leafy greens consumed in the US are in fact grown in California, some in Arizona, some in New Mexico. But the big thing is that they'll be able to grow these, they'll be able to locate these vertical farms really close to populations, which means you don't need massive farms out in, sort of remote areas where the transport task is enormous and the cost to move goods is highest. Especially when you start considering, Salinas to Los Angeles to move a load of iceberg lettuce, for example. It's a very different proposition when you can put a vertical farm in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to service the entire New England market. So I think that's the thing that really got my attention. There's lots of stories popping up around how companies are adapting to this new era that we're in, where water is becoming a fairly scarce commodity. And vertical farming is one of those. Dan, I read this morning on CNBC that, how when you and I met, I sort of said, data is the new oil. Well, I think water is going to become even more important to us in time. We're seeing incredible, it was only a few weeks ago that the Rhine River got down to 0.78 meters and they couldn't run the barges with Ford motor cars. Normally the Rhine River, where it starts in Switzerland, averages 1.3 meters. You need 1.3 meters of draft to run a fully loaded barge. They had to shut down a lot of their barge traffic. So when you hear stories like that I've not heard of in my lifetime, now maybe I've just lived under a rock in the outback in Australia far too long and didn't read about these things. But
that's not a knife.
It's not a knife. That's not a triple. I love saying that when guys say they pull out this picture of their 328-foot pup trailers and say that's a triple. Say no, that's not a triple. Let me show you 345s hooked together. So I just think this is becoming more of a story, and it's going to affect produce carriers absolutely. How quickly it takes on, as consumers, I don't know we'd ever know or care where it came. Well, we should care, but I don't know when we go to the supermarket that we'll know that it was a vertical farmed product versus something that was grown in Salinas, California. So,
well, you know what? I can actually see them using it as a marketing tool as well. True. Vertical farm, water, water conscious, or whatever the wording that they would use, kind of thing is now it's a marketing opportunity as well for somebody that's thinking of the earth.
Well, think about so the extension of that is that we've got a lot of companies now focusing on their carbon footprint and marketing that as so think about a company that now markets their water footprint, for want of a better word. How good are they at conserving water? Because where I'm from, in the Southern Hemisphere, we just do an awful job at conserving water. Like our water conservation is absolutely ridiculous. But I'm sure we could do a lot better job everywhere of just collecting what water we have. And of course, this takes pretty forward-thinking people that want to look beyond the next election cycle and just think longer term about what we need to be doing. But
so nobody in the US then.
But everybody in Canada.
Nobody in Canada either. No, nobody in Canada either.
No.
Anyway, so
no politician ever. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, you know something to get to your point, Dean. going back to green initiatives and reducing your carbon footprint, right? I know that the government has incentive programs for larger companies that if they can meet a certain percentage, that there's incentives for them to reduce their cost to a certain degree. I wonder if there's going to be such a thing on the vertical farming where there'll be incentives by the government to grow it that way, because now they're conserving energy and water, if you think about it. But I wonder what the cost difference is. It has to be immense when you think about the acres of regular farming, right? And the land that it takes up compared to 3 football fields and doing what did you say, 200 acres?
Yeah, 3.6 versus 200.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wonder if they're going to come up with some kind of incentive program on that. I mean, it just seems logical.
It'd be interesting to see the cost, because obviously in vertical, you're probably not going to have the combines like you would normally have. But the manpower to harvest is probably going to be 5 times as much as it would be for a farmer, right? So you have all these different things that are going to offset. One offsets the other, kind of thing. It'd be interesting to see the actual data on cost.
Yeah.
And it's like a first too, right? Like it's a complete first for vertical farming. Like, has there been another fruit or vegetable like that has been like this, right? Because even for myself, learning about the drought has been, like the Kardashians went like 20 times over like their water usage for like the month in California, right? And these long-term effects are going to affect everyone. So it's interesting to kind of see, like, to your knowledge, Gene, has there been a situation where we've had to use vertical farming for anything else other than trying this solution?
No, I don't.
Hold on, we got to go back here for a second, Dean. Did Ryan just throw out a stat that the Kardashians use 20% more water than they should have?
Where are you?
Hey, I got my daily dose of TMZ. I'm here for the entertainment portion of it, Like, I'm here to connect with the 18 to 25 millennials. That's the way.
You just rocked that so hard. That was funny. I love it. That's awesome.
I thought you were going to go with them taking way too many short flights on their private jets, because that's becoming they're getting a black eye over all of that, right? Everybody, whether it's the 2 football players for Paris Saint-Germain, were getting into trouble over the weekend for talking about something. They made a reference to sand yachts. I don't understand it, but they were getting into trouble because they were taking short flights. And of course, the question is,
yes,
why aren't people taking short train rides or bus rides instead of chartering planes? So I think with social media and the way that we can see the world now, that's sort of a lot flatter than it used to be because of the transparency. All of these things are becoming exposed. But Ryan, it's a great question. I don't know what's been the catalyst, other than just people being innovative and trying to find better ways to do things. There's certainly money.
Yeah, something, Dean. Think about the vineyards that are out there in California as well. With the drought and everything, I'm going to assume that has to affect their growth of the grapes and everything to make the wine. So you're going to have to. I mean, logically, wine's probably going to go up as well as this drought continues. So, there's so many other things that this drought is affecting besides, the regular type of farming that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty broad.
Well, think about, was it California? So I was reading about the drought situation in Las Vegas. I think they've outlawed's probably the wrong word, but any new home that's built in Las Vegas, you can't have one of those big mega pools in your backyard.
Wow.
So think about, the use of, pools. My previous house, we had a 3-acre lot with like an acre of green grass that we used to water from a well. Like, now you could say, I'm sure in 20 years we'll say, well, that was just completely irresponsible. But I recognize that now, and now you're seeing this movement away from, just grass around houses. And I think back to my late father-in-law, who was a Croatian immigrant that escaped, German occupation during World War II, and went to Australia and started a stonemason business. And like all good stonemasons, he concreted everything. And and all of the homes, when there was no water problems, he put green dye in the concrete and laid green concrete all around the house. So this is 40 years ago. So I can see a whole new world of concrete popping up that kind of looks like grass, but it'll be more water.
Or even the fake grass. I've seen a ton of places now, in that, like a lot on the HGTV and stuff, they put in fake grass everywhere, and it's like, now you don't have to mow it, you don't have to do it. It looks
Right,
like
but
grass,
now,
and you move on.
Well, even
right,
for
but
dog
now
lovers,
think about this: the aquifers, right? Now, if you start cementing up the ground, right, the ground's not going to be able to absorb that water. That's crucial. And I know down in the Meadowlands in New Jersey, that was a big thing when they started, making parking lots all over the place because they were ruining all the aquifers and the streams and everything because they were plowing them in and putting asphalt over it. So, I mean, there's a lot more to this than what meets the eye besides just concrete and everything. Because, I mean, believe me, I would love to have rocks around my house and I never have to, but I'd have to get that weed killer to kill all the weeds. But it's something.
Well, I mean, if we go back to that vertical farming, right? Two things. So one, I do see a huge disruption in the usual lanes that people expect, because if all of a sudden produce starts doing this instead of core centralized here and it starts moving around, I see big issues with rerouting trucks and people getting different routes. Number two, I would argue it'd be fresher. Like if there was a vertical farmer in Toronto somewhere, or in like Pickering, or in Mississauga, or up near me in the country, that produce is going to be like way fresher than something coming in from California. Not to mention, this is the big popular thing up here with farm markets, because all our farm markets are open now. And they have all that produce ready to go for us, and you go and it's picked fresh. And there's something, I mean, I'm sure everyone can agree, a fresh, like picked off the tree apple tastes so much better than the ones you have in the stores. Like so much better. Tomatoes taste so much better. Cucumbers, zucchinis, they all taste so much better.
What about the final mile, though? Think about that. If you start building these vertical farms, next to high populated areas, transportation costs are going to go down, right? Because now you're getting close to, a lot of people, in these geographical areas, instead of shipping them thousands of miles away to get to, the consumer.
The next day delivery, like you can imagine picking and packing and delivering within 24 hours. It changes that whole dynamic. Instead of like could just imagine the a day in the life of an iceberg lettuce that's picked in Salinas, California today. Probably this evening it's going to be on a team truck, and in 48 hours it'll be in Hunts Point, New York. It'll be in there, say 3 a.m. in the morning. The grower, the farmer, the shop owners will be in picking that lettuce up, putting it on a smaller truck along with 50 other orders, going back to a small community somewhere nearby. And by 9 a.m., sort of within that, 48, maybe within 72 hours easily, it's probably in someone's home being cooked. But there's a lot of cost involved in just getting that. You're probably looking at somewhere in the order of $7,500 to $8,000 just in transport costs. I should know better exactly what that rate is today, but it's probably
it's higher than that. But
So you take that out, and then you've got a much lower transportation cost. You're absolutely right, Jeff. It's
a product too, and the product,
a better product.
That's going to decrease too.
But this is sort of part of this overall trend that we've seen during the pandemic, right, where everybody wanted everything next day or delivered, so they didn't have to go out anywhere. That was kind of the prime reason. But we saw warehouses move closer to populations, and then we saw this, reemergence of the final mile business model. So I think that infrastructure is already well in place, but you'll definitely need a lot more smaller P&D refrigerated vans to do that from that particular vertical farming location. And that's going to change the transportation task. Vertical farming is expected to grow exponentially in the next decade. And I think this sort of stuff happens quickly, even though it sounds like it'll be, too distant. Just think about how much change we've had in our lives. Like I remember saying, I'll figure things out once things stop changing, was what my thought was when I was in my 20s working in the insurance industry in Australia. I quickly figured out that change is constant, and if you don't adapt to it, it'll consume you, because it's one thing that is absolutely constant is change, and it's a good thing once you get your head around it.
100%. Yeah, and I agree. I think we're going to see a lot of this start catapulting in the next couple of years, because it just seems like it's one after another. And in logistics, we're the people that have to adopt to it and see that next move. And you know, if your whole business is in produce right now, and if your sales team are not talking to vertical farmers,
Right.
you're missing the boat, right?
Yep.
This is where we have to stay ahead of those change curves. And you know, you think of how many other things have gotten closer to home, right? There's a whole lot of things that are being manufactured closer to home, or being built or being assembled closer to home now, which totally disrupts
Absolutely.
typical business, right?
Yep.
Right.
Well, it's where more jobs are, right? So there's a generational change in, you know, long haul trucking, for example, where drivers want to be at home more often. You know, I think we mentioned on the show a few weeks ago that I talked to a large truckload carrier, you know, north of 4,000 trucks, and they said that our drivers had never made more money, but they never wanted to be home more often. So our truck availability numbers are really down. So it's not about hiring drivers; it's about keeping the ones, you know, working that you've got. And the problem is that you want drivers to be happy, healthy, and making money. So this is a really delicate balance, and it's why, Dan, we said a year ago on this show that long haul truckload supply of drivers is going to be very, very tight for a long time, if not forever, because things have changed. The job is very different than what it used to be, but the driving, that business model has kind of changed, where you can now get a lot more driving opportunities closer to home in that regional short haul space and be home more often, because more freight, I think, is moving in a shorter radius of operation. I mean, we already know that 75% of freight moves under 100 miles as it is. You know, most freight moves in a very short radius of operation. It's only like less than 5% that moves over 1,000 miles. So despite, you know, when you actually look at the data, it's not an enormous freight task in terms of the long distance part. It's a more costly piece. But that's why I think they're struggling with finding drivers, because if you can't get a driver 3,000 miles a week, give him the opportunity to make or her 3,000 miles a week, you are really in trouble. And I see earnings calls coming out from large truckload carriers averaging 1,548 miles a week and turnover 138% on the driver's side. Like, no kidding. If you can't find a way to keep your drivers busy in the long haul sector, because it is plagued with delays, traffic, dock time, dwell time, just inefficiency in terms of how you're dispatched. If that problem doesn't get solved, it'll be very hard to keep drivers seated in trucks. It's just an awful lifestyle. And you, even if you love driving trucks, which, you know, I do, I couldn't work for a large carrier that couldn't give me the opportunity to easily run 3,000 miles a week, because that's what you want to do. You want to be running 500 miles a day. But if you can't, then that means you're going to say, well, I can't afford to do this anymore. And that's been the problem since I've been in this country, you know, 22 years now. That problem hasn't changed.
No.
But what is changing, though, I think, is that there are more jobs available for drivers closer to home. And that's just going to, you know, if you think about what does that mean for us in the broking, supply chain, you know, logistics space, well, it means that truckload capacity is going to be tight in the long haul sector. Like, even if you've got plenty of drivers locally, they're going to struggle to find drivers. And that's why the large truckload carriers now are talking about not decreasing contract rates, but increasing contract rates, because their costs have gone up, not just diesel, but their wage costs have gone up so much in recent years. It's a very interesting discussion. We talked about bid season on last week's show. It's a very interesting discussion, because the driver supply piece is now a crucial part of it. It's changed in a generation. You know, there's a very different generation of driver out there today that's very different than what has been the backbone of the industry for the last 30 years. That has changed significantly.
Do you think that's going to cause an issue on the trucking side to commit to some of these RFPs?
I think what's a good question. I don't know. Yes, I think they could be more selective. I think it's being driven by the shippers, though, right? So the shippers are being more selective about what lanes they're bidding on, and trying to work more closely with those carriers. But I could see carriers being more selective. Yeah, I could see them being more selective about certain lanes that don't give them balance, that don't give them density. And I might have my skis when it comes to RFPs. Jeff's our master, and I notice he's still here after his busy week last week trying to get that RFP done. So I assume you got it done.
Yes.
Yes, yeah, he did. He was going hard. He was going hard weekend and everything, Jeff. You were rocking it. Yeah,
Got to do what you got to do,
awesome.
right?
Yeah.
That's what it is, brother. That's what it is. I don't know if we'll get an hour out of today, guys. We're gonna get an hour out of today, you think? My voice is starting to go. I can feel it at the back of my throat, so I'm almost done. But I told you I wasn't going to talk too much. See that? I'm not.
You did very good. You did very good, Dan. I give you an applause.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks.
We'll get you like on, you know how like baseball pitchers, they have like a pitch count. We're gonna get you like on a word count from now on. You know, like once you hit that 100 words, it's like, yo, it's time to go. It's time to go.
Yeah, that's it. Just drop the mic. See you later. I'm gone.
Yeah,
just a question
what else?
Dean. Just a question, Dean, for you. Just based on like you mentioned that reefer carriers, they're gonna kind of not be able to do that freight out of like Salinas and stuff like that. We know that a lot of like electronics companies, a lot of retail companies are based out of California. One of them like Beyond Meat and stuff like that, like those kind of meats and stuff like that. Do you see that capacity switches over to there in terms of where we have conversations where, hey, normally we do a dry van, can we do a reefer turned off kind of thing? What would you kind of say on
now?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely capacity migration is what I call it. I think it goes on all the time. That's why a lot of guys love the reefer carrier piece because it adds that flexibility of the dry van. So I think that'll happen. And I think this is kind of a crude example, but I look at capacity like 5-year-old kids playing soccer, and they kind of follow the soccer ball around the field, and that's how capacity moves. Capacity moves where the money is, and I think that's what a lot of carriers do that want to move. That have the flexibility to move beyond their geographic footprint. And there's a lot of carriers that just run out and back, out and back, out and back. Like they just don't want to move too far beyond their domicile region. But for carriers that have got a bit more flexibility that can be out 2 or 3 days, that's exactly what they'll do. They'll go where the work is for sure.
Yeah, no, and Ryan.
That makes sense.
Yeah, Ryan, to answer your question on that, a long time ago when I was working for Onkyo USA, during the summertime, we used to have perishables that came up from Florida up into New Jersey. And it was all electronics, high-end stereo equipment. And what I did, I was like, I can get a pretty good rate by utilizing the reefer carriers that were bringing the produce up. Over the summertime, it's hot in the warehouse and everything. So I'd have the guy turn on the reefer, and the guys would be hand stacking 2,300 receivers in this, and it was great. And we got the truck to return back down to pick up another load of perishables. So I mean, I'm sure that there's other shippers out there that are just creative and doing the exact same thing, like Dean was saying, to mobilize and move these different types of modes around to where they need to be, especially, again, it's all about collaboration and talking to the carriers and where do you need to go? I need to get down to Florida, Miami, wherever. Okay, fine. I've got some dry loads that can get down there. I'll use your reefer. So you have to be creative in that area as well.
When there's a small weight penalty, right, Jeff, with the reefer carrier? Is it like significant when you load, dry freight in a reefer?
Well, yeah. I mean, over the years, I did a tremendous amount of that. Especially if you're looking to get back down from northeast and New Jersey up in this area. Not so much perishables that are going back down to Miami, and now you've got to move all over the place to get back down to get a reload. But if you happen to hook up with the right shipper and to do a reload and to cut their deadhead miles and get them back down to it, they do another reload. You can count on them being up in your area 3 days later, right, for another reload. And it just makes a lot of sense to say
most shippers will allow you to use a reefer turned off.
Yeah.
Most of the restraints are the height from the actual blanket on the roof. And where the reefer unit comes in to get pallets of full size in there, right? That's one of the main issues. The second issue is like if you're moving like skids of motor or any kind of that power,
and stuff like that,
some reefer carriers won't move it just because it's a pain in the ass to get washed out afterwards, right?
Right now, when I was in the automotive business, they had transmissions, and they had these plastic inserts that the transmissions would go in for that simple reason, so you wouldn't have spillage of oil and anything like that, and they would be all neatly packed. I think it was 8 to a pallet, if I remember, in a chimney block. We would wrap it up and put it in the reefer and head it back down. And there was no smell. There was nothing. You know, the one thing that we wouldn't do, for the obvious reasons, would be a load of onions that came into a warehouse. You surely didn't want to put any kind of corrugated boxes in or anything, because that stuff just absorbs that smell and it just ruins the product. So you have to be careful about the type of perishables that's coming into your facility to do a reload. And you should ask them, hey, what are you bringing up, before you even attempt to do something like that.
And a lot of shippers even utilize reefers going south because they get a better price, because the reefer guy knows he's going to get produce coming north.
Absolutely.
So it's like that vice versa scenario when it comes to, you know, no produce, or reefers are just come out, and then when produce happens, they'll get the big bucks kind of thing, right? So
the other thing
I mean, you go up to 88 inches, you know, 88, 90 inches, you're good, because remember, you've got the reefer tarp that goes right down the middle of it that disperses all the air in there, and you don't want to rip that baby. So you have to be extremely careful on that side.
Dan, from a carrier's perspective, when I used to run produce, my money was always off the farm, right? So, because the seasons are a very short time frame, you got to get back there quickly. So that limits the amount of freight that the scope of the freight you want on your return load. I always focused on air freight, parcel freight, stuff that was urgent, had to go overnight. Like, they're not going to sit you on a dock too long. Right. It's hard work, hauling express freight at night. But in terms of your revenue per tractor week or your miles per tractor week, it was always worth that effort because you got back quickly. So I steered clear of anything that was going to sit me on a dock. Groceries, for example, I would just avoid groceries. There was always hundreds of loads of groceries on a backhaul, but I would say I'll just run home empty, thanks. If that's all I had.
If you want to sit at CS wholesale for about 8 hours before they unload you, I mean.
Yeah. But I was always had good relationships with brokers who knew where the air freight was and when there was overflow. Like, because if they knew they had overflow as you get towards the end of the week where they needed extra capacity of an evening, if you're in the right place at the right time, that's generally how it works. But as Jeff always says, partnerships are absolutely critical, and having a good carrier and broker network is fundamental to your success.
Yes, very much so.
100%. That's a good way to end it, boys.
Yep.
Fundamental to your success, the collaboration and your carrier partner network.
Thanks, Ryan.
In trucking, our motto is people before profit. Today's market requires more transparency, consistency, and focus on what our clients need to win. Centurion Trucking and American Logistics are poised to help their clients achieve and surpass their targets. If you're looking for a team that honors your needs, dreams, and aspirations, then get a hold of Daman at American Logistics or Centurion Trucking.